I received the note on a morning in April when the wind still carried the damp scent of a winter that hadn't quite let go. It wasn't really a letter, just a plain piece of paper. No envelope, no handwriting, no carefully curved lines like I used to imagine when thinking of my daughter. Just 4 cold, evenly spaced printed words. Cruise, Saturday, 10 a.m. No mom, no love you, nothing that resembled family, just an announcement, an itinerary, a decision already printed, like the kind of cold prescription slips they hand you at the hospital. No one asking what you want. My name is Isabelle. I'm 67, a widow for nearly 10 years. I spent my life as a book editor, surrounded by the scent of old paper, smudged ink, and stories that never belonged to me. I still live in the same small wooden house in the suburbs of Maryland, where my husband and I once planted 8 lavender bushes and a single rose shrub. Now it's just me, marking the seasons by the tea I brew each morning. I have a daughter, Natalie, beautiful, brilliant, a psychiatric resident, a girl who once loved to recite poetry in front of the mirror and called me her winter queen every time I wrapped my white wool scarf. But somewhere between the years that followed, Richard's death, her father, everything cracked. Not all at once, not loudly, just gradually, like a wine glass left too close to the stove. Natalie never said it outright, but I understood. In her eyes, I was the one who let her father go. Too soon, too quietly, too passively. Richard had pancreatic cancer. His death arrived like a long, unannounced dream. I was his caregiver, but I was also the one who didn't cry when he passed, didn't scream, didn't beg for a miracle. I accepted it, and maybe that's what made Natalie believe I hadn't loved him enough. Natalie wanted me to be strong, but not in silence. She wanted resistance. She wanted me to rage against death, against illness, against pain. But I was a woman raised in a time when pain was folded into handkerchiefs and tears were swallowed, not displayed. I couldn't give her what she wanted. And over time, that made me become no one at all. For the past 3 years, she cut off contact. No Christmas calls, no messages when I was hospitalized, not even a "how are you?" Even after I'd sent her 3 unanswered letters, and yet here she was, inviting me on a cruise. I sat frozen at the kitchen table for over an hour after reading that note. My coffee had gone cold. The toast remained untouched, like the feeling I was trying to swallow. Bitterness, doubt, and something that felt almost like hope. I should have said no. A part of me screamed it loud and clear, but the other part, the softer part, the mothering part, the part that once held my feverish daughter in a thin blanket on her first sick night, that part whispered, maybe. She's changed. I stood up, slowly pulled the old suitcase out from the closet. Still the same one I last used 9 years ago, back when Richard was alive, and we still took weekend trips together. I opened it. My fingers instinctively traced the small crack along the leather seam. That scar had been Natalie's doing when she was 14. She had crashed her bicycle into it. She cried inconsolably, afraid she'd get scolded. I had just held her and said, "As long as you're safe, I don't need the suitcase to be." I let out a small laugh. I wonder now if I were the one cracked, who would hold me and say the same. I began packing. A blue wool coat, a pair of soft-soled shoes, my old brown leather notebook, and a scratched-up fountain pen. Even these small objects seemed to look at me with doubt, as if to ask, "Do you really believe you'll return in one piece?" That evening, I sat in the bedroom. The golden lamplight spilled across the old family photo on the shelf. Richard in the middle, arms wrapped around me and Natalie. She was 13 then, ponytail off to one side, her eyes like the sky right after a storm. I can't remember the last time Natalie called me Mom in a voice that felt real. Maybe after the funeral, maybe never, maybe. I forgot how her voice sounded when it still belonged to me. But still I went, not because I believed Natalie had changed, not because I craved forgiveness, but because sometimes, to know for sure that something is dead, you have to walk toward it, touch it, and listen to see if there's any heartbeat left. I zipped the suitcase shut at 4 a.m. just before sunrise. And as the wheels rolled across the old wooden floor, I could hear my heart, not eager, not frightened, but clear, cold, like unsteeped tea. I wasn't sure if this was reconciliation or a farewell wrapped in silk ribbon. I arrived at the harbor earlier than expected. The cruise ship Natalie had chosen wasn't large, nor was it glamorous like the ones you see in glossy TV commercials. It had a quietness to it, like a place meant for people who had long since made peace with silence, or were just beginning to learn how. She stood waiting at the top of the wooden gangway, still slender, white shirt perfectly pressed, her gray eyes cold as stone. The hug she gave me was brief, not entirely stiff, but certainly not a hug scented with memory. My cabin had been thoughtfully arranged. Clean white sheets, and on the desk, a framed photo of the three of us, one I don't recall ever giving Natalie. By the window, a small stack of books, the very titles I had mentioned once or twice, in old letters that were never answered. I wanted to believe Natalie was trying, that this was a genuine effort to reconnect something that had unraveled. But inside me, there was a quiet sound, like the faint twang of a guitar string that had just gone slack, still vibrating but off-key. I didn't know what to call it. I only knew it was there. On our first night aboard, Natalie and I sat across from each other in the ship's small dining room. There were maybe 10 tables, warm yellow lights, and the soft hum of a piano playing in the corner, a melody I couldn't name, but it carried the scent of a march long gone, back when Richard was still alive. Natalie poured me a cup of peppermint tea. "Helps you sleep," she said, her voice light, casual. I smelled the familiar scent, cool, fresh. But the moment the tea touched my lips, I paused. Something wasn't right. The peppermint, though slightly sweet, left a slippery metallic trace at the back of my throat. There was a film to it, thin, sticky, almost nothing, but unmistakable, like biting the edge of a spoon that hadn't been rinsed well. Not quite a taste, more of a feeling. I set the cup down, smiled, and pretended to enjoy it. Natalie watched me. Her gaze didn't waver. It wasn't a cold stare, but it was too focused, as if she were waiting for a reaction. That night I had trouble sleeping. Not insomnia, just fog. My mind felt like it was drifting through a thin layer of mist, not dense, not clear. I lay on my side, one hand clenched around the edge of the blanket, like an old woman gripping something solid to avoid slipping out of herself. The next morning, Natalie brought me a smoothie. "Fiber and protein," she said. I took it, smiled, nodded, but didn't drink. Once she left, I poured it down the sink, then sat and watched the pale purple liquid spread down the drain like diluted blood. That's when I started documenting everything. Not in my notebook. I knew that could be found. Instead, I used the ship's emergency safety brochure, scribbling in the margins with the small pencil I kept in my coat pocket. I wrote, "Day 2, peppermint tea, off taste. Smoothie, discarded. Head foggy. Fingers slightly numb. Natalie watching closely." I wrote quickly, then folded the page back. At the time, I wasn't thinking too far ahead. I still couldn't let myself believe that Natalie would actually do something to me. But when your daughter starts looking at you like you're a problem to solve instead of a person to love, you have to start asking questions. Not out of suspicion, but for survival. On the third morning, I sat alone at a small table by the window. Natalie was out, or pretending to be, giving me some so-called space. A young waitress approached, friendly-faced, and on her left wrist, I saw a small star-shaped birthmark. She poured me a cup of tea. Not peppermint, ginger and honey. I thanked her, then turned slightly to leave, and that's when she gently touched my hand. Her fingers were cold just for a second, but enough for me to feel. A small folded note pressed into my palm. I didn't open it right away. I kept my hand under the table, fingers wrapped around the thin, stiff paper. Old receipt paper by the texture. Later, back in my cabin, I locked the door and unfolded it. Scrawled in blue ink were the words, "Don't drink anything else. Next time will be the last dose. I collapsed onto the bed. My heart didn't race. I didn't panic. What I felt was a strange, hollow stillness. The kind that comes not when someone hurts you, but when you realize the hurt has been growing in silence all along. I thought of Natalie. Of her at age 8, begging me to let her go camping without being afraid of mosquito bites. Of Natalie at 16, standing outside the entrance of the med school campus, her eyes lit with ambition. And now, of 34-year-old Natalie, calmly pouring tea for her mother with a steady hand. Maybe I missed something along the way. A sign, a small cry, a fracture in my child that I wasn't sensitive enough to see. But there was one thing I would no longer miss. The truth was lodged in my throat, and I wasn't going to swallow it down one more time. People don't always die from what others do to them. Sometimes they die from what they choose to believe. There are moments in life you never forget, not because they're loud, but because they're unusually silent, as if the world holds its breath just long enough for you to realize you're not surviving, you're starting to die slowly. For me, that moment came on the evening of the 4th day. I returned to the dinner table and saw a small piece of paper folded neatly, tucked beneath my napkin. But let me start from the beginning. That night, Natalie wore a dusty pink dress, her hair tied in a high bun, and the tiny pearl earrings I had once given her when she was accepted into medical school. She looked perfect, beautiful, smart, like a woman conducting a symphony she had composed long before anyone else arrived. We were seated at a table on the open deck, under soft yellow string lights wrapped around the railing. Around us, couples laughed. Groups of middle-aged friends clinked glasses, celebrating birthdays, anniversaries. And I sat there amid the jazz music, the clatter of silverware, the laughter, across from my own daughter, and a quiet dread I couldn't quite name. Natalie talked. She spoke about a new project, about plans to open her own clinic. She spoke more than I'd ever heard her speak before. But not a single word about the past, not a single word about her father, not one mention of the 3-year silence between us. The drinks arrived. The ginger and pear spritzer she ordered for me was pleasant at first, but after just one small sip, I knew it was there again, that metallic taste, subtle, refined, but unmistakable. Like a beautiful smile with no soul behind it, I stopped drinking. I told her I needed the restroom. Natalie nodded, smiling, and continued chatting with the waiter. I got up, walked away for a bit, then looped back quietly from the opposite direction, far enough to see our table without being seen. That's when I saw her, the waitress with the star-shaped birthmark on her left wrist, folding my napkin. She didn't look at me. But I felt something pass between us, a silent signal across the air between two women, one older, one younger, one who already knows the world isn't always kind, and one who's just learning it. I returned to the table as if I had never left. Natalie looked up and asked if I wanted more tea. I smiled, shook my head, and when she turned away, I opened the napkin and found the note. I didn't read it immediately. I just held it, felt its weight, thin, stiff, and the slight tremble in my hand while my heartbeat stayed slow, but solid. Back in my room, I locked the door, turned off the overhead light, and sat beneath the small bedside lamp. Then I opened it. Just a few words, scribbled in blue pen, hurried but deliberate. Call 911. There's something in your tea. I read it once. Then again, slower, no signature, no name, no date, just handwriting slightly smudged, and a fear beginning to take shape. I sat for a long time. Didn't cry, didn't scream, just began remembering. Every cup of tea since the cruise began, every reminder to take my pills, every question about my blood pressure, my prescriptions, and the way Natalie held the teacup, not like a daughter serving her mother, but like a doctor administering medication to a patient. I remembered something I once read. Sometimes evil doesn't arrive with hatred. Sometimes it comes cloaked in entitlement, the belief that someone else knows what's best for you, better than you ever could. Maybe Natalie didn't think she was doing something wrong. Maybe she truly believed I was becoming a burden, that I was losing control, that a quiet nursing home, a legal guardian, a few gentle signatures were the kindest thing she could offer me. I understood, and that was the scariest part of all. I folded the note and hid it beneath the suitcase lining. Then, for the first time since boarding the ship, I looked straight into the mirror and said to the woman staring back at me, "You know, you're no longer in doubt. The question isn't suspicion anymore. It's survival." The next morning I skipped breakfast. I sat alone on my balcony, staring out at the sea. The water was calm, the sunlight gentle, and the world continued as if nothing was wrong. But something inside me had broken, and it didn't need to be fixed. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not because I was brave, but because I was old enough to know. Sometimes the truth isn't what you search for. It's what knocks quietly, hidden in a folded napkin note. And from that moment on, you're no longer a passenger on a cruise. You're a survivor, drifting through a journey disguised as love. There are calls that only come at midnight. Not because that's when someone chooses to speak, but because courage only wakes in the dark before the light arrives. Mine came at exactly 2:17 a.m. The ship was still gliding steadily. Outside, the ocean lay like a gray blanket, so quiet it felt staged. In my cabin, the bedside lamp cast a yellow glow. Less comfort, more warning. I was lying on my side, eyes open, fingers clenching the edge of a wrinkled blanket. I couldn't sleep, not because of age, but because the truth inside me had grown into something larger than sleep, like a shadow that stretches every time you turn your back. Then the phone rang. Just once, sharp, brief. I looked at the screen. No number, no name, just 2 words, internal call. I picked up. No one spoke for the first 3 seconds. I almost thought I'd imagined it. Then a female voice broke the silence, soft, shaky, young, but firm. "My name is Rosa. I work in the medical room. I think you need to know something." I didn't speak. I just listened, afraid that if I said a word she might vanish. Rosa continued. Her voice picked up speed, like someone trying to outrun something chasing her. "I saw your daughter last night. She said it was a B12 injection, but it wasn't. I'm a final year pharmacy student. I know that vial. That's not what B12 smells like. I wasn't supposed to check the camera feed, but I was curious, and I saw her mixing something into your tea. 2 nights in a row." I closed my eyes, and in the darkness of my own mind, I could still see it. Not sharp, not in color, but more real than anything Natalie has ever said. I can't report it formally. Not yet. I need to be sure. But you need to be careful. Don't drink anything unless you prepare it yourself. And if you can, find a way off the ship." She paused. I could hear her breathing, broken, strained, like someone lying through a paper-thin door. "I don't want to get involved in your family's business. But this isn't about emotions. This is about your life. I don't know why they're doing it. But I believe you've already felt that something's wrong, haven't you?" I nodded even though I knew she couldn't see me. Then the line went dead. No goodbye, no take care, just the long, hollow beep that followed, and the cold that shot straight down my spine. I set the phone down very gently. Didn't cry, didn't speak. I just sat there. For a long, long time, I thought about Natalie, the little girl who used to fear needles, who would recoil at the sight of blood. I remembered the time she snapped my fountain pen when she was 8, then stood frozen, pale-faced, waiting to be scolded. I didn't yell. I just took her hand and said, "Next time, just try writing with your own hand. If you get it wrong, I'll help you fix it." And now that very same hand is trying to rewrite my entire life. Rosa was right. This is no longer about love. This is about power, control, a quiet takeover, disguised in white tablecloths, gentle voices, and steaming cups of tea. I began making a list, alone in silence, from memory. I tracked every time Natalie brought me food, every pill, every cup of tea. I compared sensations, numb fingers, clouded mind, uneven heartbeat. I began to connect the dots, and the picture that emerged was so clear, it made me shiver. I knew that if I told anyone, they would think I was old, paranoid, that I was being overly sensitive, that this was just a vacation, and that I should be grateful my daughter still cares. But I also knew this. Women are often taught to be grateful even while they are being deceived. I was too old to be that obedient. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat, my back against the headboard, and began writing my story. Not to tell anyone, but so I wouldn't forget myself. I wrote like someone preserving evidence. Each line a trace of survival, because when someone makes you doubt your own senses, the only thing left to hold on to is the written word. When a woman is cast into darkness, she doesn't scream. She learns to look, and once her eyes adjust, she begins to see every face clearly. After Rosa's midnight call, I knew trust was dead. The only question left was I ready to survive knowing I was being hunted? The next morning I woke early. No curtains drawn, no toothbrush touched. I just sat at the small table by the window, my hand resting on the cold wood, eyes fixed on the misty silver water beyond. My body felt it. It wasn't what it used to be. But my spirit, the part of me I had silenced for too long, had started to move again, gently but deliberately, like a quiet wave retreating from shore, gathering strength to rise. At 9 a.m., I opened my door and stepped into the hallway. I didn't need to call for Rosa. She was already there, half hidden behind the linen cart. She handed me a manila envelope. No name, no markings. Inside were 3 photographs, a black and white printout, and a note handwritten in blue ink. I didn't open it immediately. I slipped it beneath the lining of my suitcase, the same spot where Natalie once hid her high school diary. Now it held something else, the truce. That evening, I sat on the upper deck. Natalie brought me a cup of chamomile tea, said it would help me sleep. I smiled. I held the cup, let the heat sink into my palms. But I didn't drink. I simply watched. She didn't give anything away. Her face, once the light of my life, had become a mask, sculpted by confidence and rehearsal. But her eyes, they betrayed her. She was hungry for control. She wanted to know if I'd sipped it. She was watching for a symptom, a pause, a stagger, a trembling hand. I gave her that, but not with my hand, with a smile. 8 p.m. I was alone in my cabin. The door was locked. Warm yellow light spilled over my hands as I opened the envelope. First photo. Natalie pouring a liquid from a small brown bottle into a teacup. The label wasn't clear, but it was clear enough to see it wasn't honey. Second photo. Darren, Natalie's husband, standing outside a pharmacy. In his hand was a small white paper bag, zoomed in, blurry but still legible, digoxin. Third photo. Someone wearing a dress identical to Natalie's, bending in front of my cabin door. At her feet, a folded piece of paper being slipped underneath. I took a deep breath. My body didn't tremble, no rage, no tears, just a stillness, so deep I could hear my own heartbeat, steady as it ticked, slow, firm, exact. I unfolded the printed sheet. It was a copy of a prescription record, matching what Rosa had described. A cardiac medication, potent, capable of inducing arrhythmia in elderly patients if misused. I lifted my head and looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was not a victim. She was no longer just a mother. I, was a witness. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly what I had to do. I pulled out my suitcase, lifted the lining, and tucked every piece of evidence beneath it. Then I opened the drawer and took out my backup phone, the one I bought last year, just in case. I saved the photos and sent them to my lawyer's email with a short message. Keep this. If I don't call, you call me. The next morning, Natalie brought breakfast up to my room. On the tray, orange juice, a slice of toast, a few cubes of watermelon, and a cup of peppermint tea. I smiled. And for the first time, it wasn't out of politeness. It was the line between two sides of a war. She placed the tray down, looked at me. "How are you feeling, Mom?" "I chose the tea you always liked." I looked her in the eyes. "Yes, the scent is familiar." After she left, I wrote another note in my ledger. "The photos are real. The behavior repeats. I'm not shaking. I'm awake. I'm ready." At noon, I went to the reception desk. I asked to speak with the ship's chief legal officer, a young, polite man named Givens. I didn't cry. I didn't ramble. I simply opened my suitcase and handed him the envelope. "I believe I'm being intentionally poisoned. This is the evidence. I need help, not as a passenger, but as someone whose life is in danger." Givens was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. He accepted the evidence and promised to back it up and deliver it to the captain. I left without looking back. I didn't need reassurance. I didn't need validation, because for the first time in a long while, I had done something incredibly simple and incredibly difficult. I had chosen to stand on my own side. I used to believe that being a mother meant staying silent. Now I understand. Sometimes being a mother also means protecting yourself, even from the very child you gave birth to. And if there's one thing I've learned after all of this, it's this. Not everyone who pours you tea wants you to live. There are battles that require no knives, no guns, and no blood. They require only a gaze held long enough, a sentence spoken out loud, and a woman who is no longer afraid. That afternoon, the weather was unfairly beautiful. The sun was beginning to set, casting the ocean in a rich amber gold. Couples gathered on the deck, laughing, holding champagne flutes, their dresses and scarves fluttering in the wind. I stood alone by the railing, wearing my old wool coat, my hand gripping the strap of a canvas bag. Inside the bag was everything I had: the recording, the photos, the prescription, and the documents Natalie had prepared for me to sign, the ones she thought I wouldn't understand or wouldn't live long enough to object to. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't angry. I wasn't cold. I just knew. Natalie and Darren stepped onto the deck 10 minutes later, hand in hand like a model couple. Her face was perfectly made up. Nude lipstick, a cream-colored jacket, the same color she once told me was too dull when she was in school. I looked at her, and I realized she hadn't come to talk. She had come to end it. The sunset party was gentle. The captain gave a speech. There was applause. There was laughter. A few couples received bouquets for their 20th anniversaries. I waited until the speakers went quiet. Then I stepped onto the small wooden platform, where they had placed a microphone for guests to give thank you remarks. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't check with anyone. I simply said to the technician, "I'd like to share a few words." "If that's okay." The young man smiled, nodded, handed me the mic. I stood there, bathed in sunset light, surrounded by a crowd expecting a heartwarming story, and I gave them the truth. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Isabelle. This week is my birthday. I'm turning 67, and this cruise was a gift from my daughter." All eyes turned to me. Natalie took a step back. Darren looked around, confused. I smiled softly, like someone finally undoing the top button of a collar she's worn for too many years. I used to think this was a gesture of reconciliation. But it turns out it was a test, not to see if I'm still mentally sound, but to see if I still trust myself. I set the mic down on the table, reached into my pocket, took out my phone, pressed play, no music, no filters, just Natalie's voice, clear, cold, composed like a legal memo. My mom's been more confused lately. I think if we can get the healthcare proxy signed early, it'll be easier to manage. And if needed, I can recommend moving her to assisted care. I've already found a place. We just need a reason. I used to think there would never come a day when I'd look my daughter in the eye, the child I once cradled in a delivery room, lulled to sleep with fairy tales. and understand that she was no longer a safe place. But that evening, beneath the sunset on the cruise ship's deck, I didn't just see it, I accepted it. And I acted. The weather was absurdly beautiful. The sea was calm, sunlight coating the waves like a thin layer of sugar on cake. People gathered in small clusters, raising glasses, laughing, posing for photos. No one knew that slung across my shoulder in a canvas bag was a weapon. Not a gun, evidence. I had spent the entire morning preparing, charged the voice recorder, reviewed the photos, read over every note I'd taken. I even wrote out a few sentences, in case I got too emotional to speak. But when I stepped onto the small speaking platform at the front of the deck, the same place where the captain usually delivered birthday wishes, I didn't tremble. I didn't need notes. I didn't need permission. I turned on the mic myself. My voice rang out. Not loud, not dramatic, but clear. My name is Isabelle. I'm 67 and I want to thank my daughter, Natalie, for gifting me this cruise for my birthday. Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. Natalie stood among them, smiling gently, as if nothing was unusual. But I'd also like to share something else, that some gifts aren't meant to bring us joy. They're meant to test whether we're still awake. The air shifted, quiet, curious. I reached into my bag, took out the recorder and pressed play. The voice that came through was unmistakable. Natalie's, crisp, clinical as measured as a signed contract. My mom's been more confused lately. I think if we get the healthcare proxy signed now, it'll be easier to manage. She doesn't need to know the details. Just a few signatures. Natalie went pale. Darren, standing beside her, scanned the crowd. But no one laughed. No one whispered. Just the sound of the wind brushing against the rails. I switched the recorder off. Took the mic again. I've been cared for very thoroughly. Tea, prepared in advance. Medication, handed directly to me. But I was also being slowly removed from my own life. Legally, strategically, I looked at Natalie. And maybe you thought I wasn't sharp enough to notice. But today I'm standing here to say, I know there were a few whispers. A young woman to my right gasped softly, "Oh my God." An older man in a gray suit, standing beside his wife, crossed his arms and nodded, just once. No one clapped, but the silence in that moment was a form of acknowledgement. I didn't turn away. I held Natalie's gaze a little longer than usual. In that look, there was no hatred, only the recognition. We had arrived at a place from which there was no return. I stepped down from the platform. A security officer approached. He didn't wait for instruction, just leaned in and whispered something to Natalie, gentle but clear. They asked her to leave. Darren hesitated but followed. I didn't look back. That night I didn't have dinner. I didn't call anyone. I didn't play music. I did only one thing. I poured myself a real cup of peppermint tea from the tea bag I had packed in my suitcase back home. No foreign substance, no watching eyes. No one poured it for me. No one waited to see if I would finish it. I sat in the room, turned on my voice recorder and played back my speech, not to praise myself, but to confirm that I had really done it, that the woman speaking in that recording was me, that voice was mine. Not trembling, not faltering, not hiding. I wrote a single line in my notebook. I spoke. I didn't stay silent, and I am still here. I remembered something my late husband once said, back when we were young and argued often. Some truths don't need to win. They just need to be heard. That night my truth had been heard, not by the whole world, but by me. And that was enough. I spoke. And this time, no one could silence me by pouring more tea into the cup. I left the ship like a woman stepping out of her former life. No heavy suitcase, no farewell, no memory strong enough to make me turn around. That voyage had carried me to the edge of pain and showed me that even at the brink of the cliff, you can learn how to stand. A week later, I sat in my lawyer's office. Ash gray carpet, a walnut wood desk. Janice, the same woman who had drafted my and my husband's will 30 years ago, looked at me without asking a thing. She simply nodded when I made the request. Remove Natalie's name from all documents. Assets, house, support funds. I want everything rewritten. She didn't ask for a reason. She just knew. The woman sitting before her wasn't here for revenge. She was here to reclaim her voice and legal papers. They were a kind of voice. 2. I signed every page. My hands didn't shake, my eyes didn't look away. Each signature was a clean cut, not from family, but from the manipulation disguised as love. I returned home. The small house was still. Afternoon sun spilled through the shutters like dust. I changed the locks, took down the old family photo from the mantel, and in its place, I laid a thick sheet of paper handwritten. I am not what was done to me. I am what I choose to do after. The next day, I went to the market, bought a few bundles of fresh mint, brewed myself a cup of tea, with my own hands, poured by me, sipped by me. No one stood beside me, no eyes watching, and the tea was real tea. No metallic aftertaste, no sting, just a quiet, full aroma, like the first peace after a very long war. Each morning, I wake early. Not from anxiety, but because my body has finally learned how to breathe softly. I walk the neighborhood, pass by the old bookshop. Once hours, I don't go in, I just stand outside, watching the yellow light spill over the book covers. No Richard, no Natalie, but me, still standing, still looking toward the light. At night, I still wake up sometimes, 3 a.m., not from fear, just because the body remembers, but I no longer wrestle with sleep. I get up, boil water, make tea, sip it slowly, and I write a few words in my journal. I'm still here. Some wounds don't need to be healed. They just need to be lived with more gently. Rebirth, for me, is not some grand ceremony. No one brings flowers, no applause. Rebirth is when I can go to sleep without double locking the door, when I'm not afraid to leave the phone on silent, when I stop checking the water in my glass with my nose, when I can sit alone and not feel like I'm missing anyone. Things is no longer something I fear. It's the space where I hear myself again, and I don't need to be loved to feel alive. I just need not to have life drained from me in the name of family. Rebirth is not about starting over. It's about continuing on legs that once collapsed and with a heart that is no longer naive but still chooses to be gentle. I lost my daughter, or perhaps I never truly had her, but I found myself again, and this time I won't let anyone erase me just because they call it caring for Mom. 3 weeks after leaving the ship, I received a letter, not from Natalie, but from her lawyer. Thick paper, luxurious envelope, firm's name embossed in gold. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the dining table, where I sit every morning with a cup of peppermint tea I brew myself from the leaves grown in my garden. I left that letter there for 3 days. Every time I passed by, I looked at it, not as a threat, but as a quiet reminder. You still owe yourself an answer. On the 4th day, I opened it. Inside, there was no apology. No question asking if I was okay. Just a formal notice expressing concern over my recent decisions to alter my will and legal power of attorney. They used phrases like emotionally compromised, potentially influenced, under pressure during travel, and at the bottom, an invitation to mediate before taking the matter to court. I didn't get angry. I wasn't surprised, I just felt sad for the way Natalie chose to end this chapter. She didn't ask why I did what I did. She just tried to prove that I wasn't sane enough to know what I was doing. I called Janice, my lawyer. She chuckled softly. We have everything. The recordings, the photographs, the witnesses. You don't need to worry. I nodded, then set the phone down. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt certain I wrote a letter, not to send, just to fold and place in the bottom drawer of my desk. Natalie, I don't hate you, but I do not belong to you. I am someone who survived, not because I was loved, but because I finally learned how to love myself. That evening it rained softly. I didn't turn on the living room lights. Just let the kitchen glow fall gently across the handwritten quote framed above the mantel. I wrote a letter. Didn't send it. Didn't sign it. Just folded it, placed it in a drawer, the way people keep a note to the past. Natalie, I don't hate you. I just regret that I never taught you this. Love is not control, and silence is not surrender. I chose to live, not to take revenge, but because I couldn't let someone else write my story. I made tea. This time peppermint, a small handful. Boiled water poured in. The scent rose, light, real. No trace of medication, nothing to question. I poured it into a white porcelain cup, sat down in my wooden chair, wrapped an old wool scarf around my shoulders. No radio, no one beside me, just me and a cup of tea whose ingredients I knew by heart. I sipped slowly. The tea was warm, perfectly so. The mint, crisp, clean. No strange aftertaste, no brain fog, nothing to decode or doubt, just tea. And me, the first sip, warm. The second, soft. The third, full. As if for the first time in years, I wasn't drinking to survive. I was drinking to enjoy. The next morning, I received a call from Janice. She said Natalie's lawyers had officially withdrawn all legal action. No explanation, no apology. Just one line. The matter is considered resolved. I didn't exhale in relief. I simply stood up, walked into the backyard, and cut a few more sprigs of mint. The sun had just crested above the trees. Not too bright, but just enough to light up a morning with nothing left to fear. Not everyone who pours you tea wants you to live long. And not everyone who calls you mother sees you as a person. I had lived through all of that. Not by luck, not because someone woke me up, but because of one thing. I chose to trust my own instincts instead of someone else's words. I rewrote my will. But what I truly rewrote was my life, and in the end, I didn't just survive. I'm still here with a real cup of tea, in a morning I brewed myself, and a life that no longer belongs to anyone but me. If you've listened this far, then maybe you too have walked through a silence like mine, a relationship once called close, a wound no one could see, a sweet word poured into your ear like honey, but dissolving in your heart like poison. I'm not telling this story to reopen the pain. I'm telling it because I know there are women sitting quietly in warm rooms that feel cold, drinking tea, without knowing what it really tastes like, living lives, without knowing if they still belong to themselves. If that's you, then please hear me from the bottom of my heart. You don't need to wait for someone to save you. All it takes is one first step. Trust your own instincts. And if you can, write it down. See yourself again, with gentler eyes. I survived not because I'm stronger than others, but because I stopped closing my eyes every time someone poured me what they called love. If this story touched something in you, leave a comment or just a single dot. Sometimes, one small moment of quiet is all it takes for us to recognize each other in this noisy world. And if you want to hear more stories like this, click subscribe so you won't miss the kind of tales that don't need to shout to make you pause.